The little girl came out of nowhere, bare feet slapping marble, yellow dress, two uneven pigtails. She shoved through the gap between the two bodyguards like the gap existed for her specifically, and planted herself in front of Martha Woods, both arms crossed and her small jaw locked. She was shaking. Martha could see it. She did not move.
You
Let her
better
go.
don't touch
Her
her,
voice came
or
out
you'll have to
with a
deal with
tremor
me
she refused to
first.
let stop her. She looked straight up at the man whose hand was crushing Martha's arm. Or you'll have to deal with me. Complete silence. The bodyguard looked down at the child. He looked at his colleague. His colleague looked back with the expression of a man whose training had not covered this. Martha's heart was slamming. Her mouth was dry. 30 seconds ago, she had been backed against a corridor wall, in the most expensive house she had ever entered in her life. One bodyguard's grip digging into her upper arm, hard enough to bruise. The other blocking the exit like a wall that had learned to breathe. Choi Sarah was standing between them, with her arms folded and her chin lifted, and an expression like she was watching something she had already scheduled. We found it in her bag, Sarah had said, voice smooth, practiced even, the document from his private study, the cash envelope, both of them. I didn't take anything. Martha had kept her voice steady. It had cost her everything. I haven't been in the study. I came here because I have documented evidence that someone is. Mr. Park does not take meetings with staff who steal from him. That was when the feet came. Now the corridor was frozen around a 6-year-old girl who had not moved a single inch and showed no intention of moving. Sarah's composure cracked at the edge. Seo Yeon, go back to your room, right now. Seo Yeon did not look at Sarah. She had not looked at Sarah once. She was looking up at Martha with the open, fearless curiosity of a child who has not learned to hide what she feels. She studied Martha's face for one long moment, like she was reading something she already knew the ending of. Then she reached up and took Martha's hand in both of hers. Nuna, she said quietly. Martha didn't speak Korean. The word landed in her chest anyway, like something clicking into place that she hadn't known was loose. She looked down at this child who owed her nothing, who had never seen her before in her life, who had run barefoot down a marble corridor and put herself between two armed men and a stranger, because something in her had simply decided. The bodyguard released Martha's arm. If you have ever watched a child stop a room just by refusing to move, just by being so certain about something, that every adult loses their footing all at once, you already know what that corridor felt like. If you haven't, stay with this story. Because what happens when the smallest person in a building turns out to be the only one seeing clearly is about to change everything. Subscribe right now. Hit the bell. You are not prepared for what comes next. 72 hours before that corridor, Martha Woods was sitting at her kitchen table in Atlanta at 11 at night, with 4 spreadsheets open and a feeling in her stomach that she had spent 8 years learning to take seriously. She was 29 years old, caramel skin, dark sharp eyes, the kind of woman who noticed the thing in the corner of the room that everybody else walked past. She had grown up in a household where money disappeared without explanation and nobody talked about it, and she had built her entire career out of making money explain itself. Forensic accounting was not glamorous work. It was slow and meticulous and solitary, and she was exceptionally good at it. 8 months ago, she had taken a contract through a consulting firm. Private investor, legitimate portfolio, real estate holdings across 3 countries, a logistics operation, 2 tech startups in early growth stage. The client was listed in her contract as M. Park and communicated exclusively through intermediaries. She had never met him in person. She had never needed to. Until 3 weeks ago when she found the bleed. It started as a rounding inconsistency in one of the real estate sub-accounts. Small enough to look like a data entry error. She pulled the thread anyway because that was what she did, and what she found underneath it stopped her cold. A pattern. Small withdrawals at irregular intervals, routed through a chain of shell structures with enough sophistication to avoid triggering the automated monitoring flags built into the system. The kind of sophistication that didn't come from outside. Whoever was doing this understood the portfolio's internal architecture, the way you only understand something when you have been shown it from the Inside, someone with full access had been quietly bleeding this portfolio for months and covering their tracks in real time. Martha spent 2 weeks building her case. She documented every layer. She photographed every page before she left her apartment. She made 3 separate cloud backups. She told nobody. Then she requested an urgent in-person meeting with M. Park and booked the first available flight to Seoul. She had no idea who M. Park actually was until the car that was sent for her pulled through a set of gates that belonged on a government facility, and she looked up at a house that looked back at her like a warning she had arrived too late to read. Park Min-jun was 38 years old and had built the kind of life that looked completely legitimate from the outside because he had spent 15 years making certain it did. The logistics company was real. The real estate portfolio was real. The tech investments were real, and 2 of them were performing exceptionally well. The businesses were not a front, they were a wall. Carefully constructed, obsessively maintained, functional in every direction, standing between the world that knew his name in boardrooms and the world that knew his name in entirely different rooms. He was not a man who smiled easily or spoke more than the situation required. He had perfected stillness as a form of power so completely that people sometimes forgot, sitting across tables from him, to be afraid, and then remembered all at once when he looked directly at them. He had learned early that the man who controlled his reactions controlled the room. He had never unlearned it. There was exactly one place in his life where that control broke completely, and her name was Seo Yeon. His daughter was 6 years old, and she had her mother's eyes, and his stubbornness, and a personality so enormous it arrived in every room, approximately 3 full seconds before she did. Her mother had died when Seo Yeon was 2. Park had raised her with household staff, and a rigidity of routine he told himself was stability, and that Seo Yeon cheerfully demolished every single day simply by being entirely herself. She was the one thing in his life that made him feel the full weight of what he was protecting, and the full terror of what he could lose. For 10 months, with increasing clarity and decreasing subtlety, Seo Yeon had not liked Choi Sarah. Park had catalogued this in 17 different ways and arrived at the same conclusion every time: jealousy. A child adjusting to change. Normal developmental resistance. He watched his daughter leave rooms the moment Sarah entered them. He received drawings of their family unit with a deliberate empty space where Sarah should have been. Seo Yeon had told her nanny that Sarah smelled like lying. She had refused to sit beside Sarah at dinner for 6 consecutive weeks. And one evening, in the specific tone she used when she was being most dangerous, she had looked across the dinner table at Sarah and said, "Your eyes don't match your mouth." Sarah had laughed it off with the gracious ease of a woman practiced at deflecting things that threatened her. Park had taken Seo Yeon aside afterward and told her it was not kind to say things like that to guests. Seo Yeon had looked at him with her mother's eyes. She had said nothing. That silence was the most eloquent thing she had ever communicated to him. And he had chosen to file it as jealousy anyway, because it was easier. He had been wrong. And somewhere beneath the part of him that found it convenient to be wrong, he had felt the truth of it the entire time. Choi Sarah had arrived in his life at an industry event 10 months ago, educated, cultured, 3 languages, old soul family money, and the social confidence that came with generations of it. She fit the shape of his life without friction, understood the demands of his schedule without complaint, and was precisely gracious to his associates in a way that reflected well on him. In every room, he had allowed himself, slowly and with significant internal resistance, to trust her. What he did not know that morning was that Sarah had been told about Martha's visit 43 minutes before the car reached his gates. The woman who told her was a household administrator named Mrs. O, who had been receiving a secondary income for 8 months from a source she had chosen not to examine. She sent a text message, 6 words: "The accountant is coming, early." Sarah read it in the bathroom, with the door locked, and sat on the edge of the tub for 90 seconds while her face went completely smooth, and she did the math. A forensic accountant requesting urgent in-person contact meant exactly one thing. Martha had found the bleed. If Martha reached Park before Sarah could neutralize the situation, everything Sarah had spent 10 months building would end in a single conversation. Sarah moved. She used the key she had copied 3 months ago. She went to the study. She took the document bearing Park's private seal from the file cabinet, and the marked cash envelope from the safe, whose combination she had memorized across weeks of careful observation. During the staged welcome she arranged for Martha in the reception room, offering tea and making small gracious conversation while taking Martha's bag to rest it on a chair. She found the bottom of the bag beneath the notebooks and placed both items there with hands that did not shake. Then she walked to the corridor. She spoke to the bodyguards. She arranged her face into the expression of a woman who had been reluctantly forced to act. By the time Park's assistant came to collect Martha for her meeting, Martha had already been convicted in the corridor of the house she had crossed, an ocean to protect. That was the moment Seo Yeon came running, and now Park Min-jun was coming down the east staircase toward the sound of a disruption his assistant had described in 3 words before Park had already started moving. And he came around the corner and stopped completely. His daughter was planted in front of a stranger he had never met, both small arms crossed, both feet together, jaw set, shaking slightly and absolutely immovable. The stranger was a woman whose caramel skin and sharp dark eyes and fierce controlled expression told him she was holding herself together through something that was costing her seriously. And Sarah was standing to the side with evidence already laid out on the corridor table with the precision of a woman who had arranged it there, and was waiting for the response she had already scripted. Min-jun. Sarah's voice landed exactly right, regretful, reluctant, certain. I'm so sorry you're dealing with this. The evidence was in her bag. Park looked at the document with his private seal. He looked at the cash envelope. He looked at Martha. I did not take those things. Martha's voice was controlled and direct, and he could see the seams of what it cost her to keep it that way. I came here because I have documented evidence that someone inside your operation is systematically dismantling your portfolio through a chain of shell accounts. I have the full reconstruction. I have backups. Someone accessed my bag before I could reach you, because they knew exactly why I was here and needed to stop me from telling you. Clean logic, real conviction. He felt the truth of it, in the same place he felt things that actually mattered. His chest recognized it before his mind had finished processing the words. He looked at Sarah. She met his eyes with the steady patience of a woman who had been wronged and was choosing grace about it. Not performance. Something he had learned across 10 months to read as genuine. He looked at Seo Yeon. His daughter released Martha's hand. She walked to her father slowly, which was how he knew she was being most serious. She looked up at his face and said quietly in Korean, "She came to protect you, Appa. The other one didn't." The corridor was absolutely still. Park Min-jun made the wrong choice. He told himself it was procedure, physical evidence over unverified claims, rational, controlled. He built the justification in the 4 seconds between hearing Seo Yeon's words and opening his mouth, and he felt the wrongness of it, even as he was building it, and he opened his mouth anyway. Ms. Woods, I need to ask you to remain on the property while we verify the situation. You'll be comfortable. It won't be long. Martha stared at him. The fear that had been in her face shifted into something harder and colder. You're detaining me. I'm asking you to. I heard what you said. She looked down at Seo Yeon. Everything in her face changed. She crouched to the little girl's level and looked at her directly. And her voice came out soft and certain. Thank you. You were so brave. Seo Yeon looked at her with her mother's eyes. She reached out and touched Martha's face once with 2 fingers, very gently, like she was confirming something she already knew. Then she straightened and looked at her father with an expression that no 6-year-old should be capable of producing. She walked past him toward the stairs without a single word. She did not speak to him at dinner. She sat across the long table and ate her food and answered direct questions with single syllables, and looked at him across the white tablecloth with an expression that held no anger in it at all, which was so much worse than anger. Just a child who had been right. and was waiting with complete patience for her father to reach the same conclusion. Park Min-jun had looked across tables at men who wanted him in the ground and felt less exposed than he felt under his daughter's quiet eyes that evening. She did not speak to him the next morning either. He knocked at 7. She opened the door, registered his presence, turned back to her desk, and picked up her crayon like he was furniture. He stood in the doorway of his daughter's bedroom and felt the specific shame of a man who had made the wrong call and cannot undo it. Seo Yan ah. His voice was level. It always was. I had to follow the evidence. I couldn't act only on. She selected a different crayon. She'll be comfortable the moment we verify the situation. Did Nuna eat breakfast? Seo Yeon put her crayon down. She turned and looked at him. Did she eat breakfast, Appa? The word Nuna landed in his chest like a small stone. I'll make sure. Did she eat breakfast? Park Min-jun left to personally confirm that Martha Woods had been given breakfast and stood in the corridor outside the guest room, where she was being held and experienced, for the first time in a long time, the sensation of not being in control of his own house. It was deeply uncomfortable. He stood with it for a moment, and then he went to find Director Han. Behind the guest room door, Martha was not sitting still. She had known when she drove through those gates that environments like this one made evidence disappear. Habit had made her photograph every page before she left Atlanta. The cloud backup was complete and untouchable. She had asked the guard outside for a notepad and pen within 20 minutes of being shown the room. Both had been brought without comment. She had been reconstructing her entire case from memory for 2 hours. Every shell account, every routing chain, every timestamp, every flag threshold that had been deliberately avoided. Laid out in her careful small handwriting across hotel notepad pages, organized by account chain, cross-referenced with small arrows she drew between the connecting structures. It was precise and complete, and she was on her 6th page when the paper appeared under the door. It slid through slow and deliberate, folded twice, pushed at a careful angle. Martha set her pen down and picked it up and opened it. 2 figures, one tall with curly hair, the skin colored in careful layered caramel tones like Seo Yeon had tried every brown crayon in the box. One small with uneven pigtails, hands connected between them. At the top in block letters only slightly uneven, Nuna and Seo Yeon. Martha sat down on the floor with her back against the bed and looked at the drawing. This child, this 6-year-old girl who had never seen her face before today, who had run barefoot down a marble corridor and put her small, shaking body between 2 armed men and a stranger, and held the line until the stranger was released, who was now sitting outside this door drawing their names together, like they had always been connected. Martha picked up her pen and, in the corner of the drawing, she added a small, careful star. She slid it back under the door. 10 seconds of silence. Then a sound from the corridor that was small and delighted and completely unguarded. Small feet. Quick retreat. Then return. Another paper slid under the door. This one had 3 figures. Seo Yeon, Martha, and a third, taller than both of them, left as a careful outline only, an empty space held with intention. Not forgotten, saved. Martha stared at the outline for a long time. She told herself it didn't matter. She was a forensic accountant being detained in a foreign country, and what mattered was the evidence and the transfer window and getting out of this room. She told herself this firmly, and then she added 2 stars to the outline's corner and slid it back, under the door. In the corridor, Park Min-jun found his daughter, sitting cross-legged against the guest room door with her crayon box at 9:50, in the morning with the peaceful certainty of someone who was exactly where she was supposed to be. He stood and looked at her for a long moment. Then he went to find Director Han. Director Han was 54 years old and had been with Park for 19 years and understood everything about everything and waited for the right moment with the patience of someone who had long since learned it always arrived. He was at his 2nd-floor desk with tea when Park walked in and closed the door behind him. The accountant, Park said. Tell me exactly how she came to us. Director Han set down his tea. I recruited her. The silence had real weight in it. 6 months ago, I identified inconsistencies in the financial reporting that our internal team had not flagged, Director Han said. The pattern of access pointed to someone with intimate internal knowledge of the portfolio architecture. I ran thorough checks on every member of the internal financial team. Nothing definitive. Which meant the origin point was someone trusted enough to have full visibility without sitting formally on the team. He paused. I could not move against someone in your inner circle without proof that had not already been handled by someone inside this building. If I was wrong about the target, I would have created a fracture that could never be repaired. I needed someone external, someone with no loyalty to anyone here, and no knowledge of what she was walking into. You brought in a woman who had no idea what this house was, Park said, and let her walk in alone. I brought in someone completely clean who could find what nobody inside could safely find. Director Han looked at him without flinching. She found it in 8 months. I have been looking for 14. Park stood at the window looking down at the garden below. Imported trees, late morning light across the grass. His daughter somewhere in the corridor outside a locked door, passing drawings underneath it to the woman he had detained for trying to tell him the truth. Pull the secondary security footage, he said, the study camera from the August upgrade. A brief silence. Sarah doesn't know about the secondary camera. I know, Park said. That's why I want it. They watched the footage in Director Han's office with the door locked. The timestamp read 6:47 that morning, 43 minutes before Martha's car reached the gates. The camera angle was narrow, and it was entirely sufficient. It showed Sarah entering the study with a key that opened a door she had no business being able to open. It showed her at the file cabinet, moving with the practiced ease of someone who knew exactly which drawer she needed. It showed her at the safe, her fingers on the combination with a familiarity that could only come from watching it, entered enough times to have it memorized. It showed her taking the document and the envelope and leaving. 12 minutes later, it showed Martha being walked past the closed study door without entering it. Park watched the footage twice without speaking. Then he sat back and was quiet in the way that meant everything was working very hard, behind a completely still surface. How far does it go? He said. The shell structure the accountant identified connects to a Delaware holding company registered 18 months ago, Director Han said. The beneficial ownership is obscured through 4 layers, but the signature pattern points toward Yoon Tae-sik's organization. Park was still. 18 months ago, he said. Yes. She came to me 10 months ago, yes. She was already in position before the evening we met. Director Han said nothing. He didn't need to. Park stood and looked at the garden and thought about 10 months. Dinners, conversations across that long table. A woman who fit so seamlessly into the shape of his life that he had allowed himself, slowly and with real resistance, to believe it was genuine. He thought about a 6-year-old drawing family portraits with empty spaces. He thought about eyes that don't match your mouth, and a father who told his daughter that was unkind. He thought about Martha sitting in the guest room right now, rebuilding her entire case by hand, because he had chosen the planted evidence over the woman who came to warn him. I want everything you have on the Delaware company in the next hour, he said, and I want confirmation on Yoon Tae-sik before end of day. He went to the guest room himself. He dismissed the guard without explanation. He opened the door. Martha was on the floor surrounded by 6 pages of handwritten reconstruction, organized in careful rows, cross-referenced and precise. She looked up at him, without fear and without performance. Just a woman who had been through something serious in his house and was waiting to find out what kind of man he was going to turn out to be. Do you want to see what she has been hiding, Martha said, or not? Park looked at this woman, 29 years old, Atlanta forensic accountant, caramel-skinned and sharp-eyed, and sitting on the floor of a room she had been locked into, surrounded by handwritten evidence she had reconstructed from memory, having spent the morning passing crayon drawings back and forth with his daughter under a door. He sat down on the floor across from her. Martha looked at him sitting on the floor of his own guest room. Something shifted in her expression. Not warmth, not yet. Something more careful than that. She spread the pages between them. They went through it together, and the picture that emerged was worse than Martha had initially found. The shell structure was not simple skimming. It was a precision instrument designed to compress and redirect controlling interest in three of Park's most valuable legitimate holdings to a parent company that would activate the moment the final transfer completed. The window was 19 days. The mechanism used the portfolio's own internal architecture against itself, designed to dismantle the whole structure from inside, using its own systems as the weapon. This was not built by someone who was given a general description of your finances, Martha said. Her pen tracked the routing chain across 2 pages, connecting the shell account sequence. She was close enough that Park could see the ink stain on her right index finger from hours of handwriting, the slight focused furrow between her brows, when a connection needed confirming. Whoever built this routing architecture knew your specific flag thresholds, your reporting cycles, the timing protocols, the exact blind spots in the automated monitoring. This was constructed around your system by someone who had it explained to them from the inside in detail, multiple conversations worth of detail. Yuntae sick, Park said. He lost a federal logistics contract to my company 3 years ago. The Delaware company connects to his organization. Director Han is confirming the full chain now. But the company was registered 18 months ago. She was recruited and positioned before I ever met her. Martha was completely still. 10 months, she said. Yes. She built 10 months of. She stopped. She looked at him directly, and what was in her face was not quite pity and not quite anger and was harder than both of them. Yes, Park said. He said it the way you say something when the weight of it is pressing on your chest and you have decided you are not going to look away from it. Seo Yan appeared in the doorway. She had been in the corridor, obviously. She had decided the conversation had reached a point where her presence was appropriate, and she came in and settled herself in the corner with her crayons and began coloring with the absolute serenity of someone who had been waiting for this room to exist for a long time. Park looked at his daughter. She warned me, he said to Martha, from the beginning. For 10 months she told me in every way she had available. I called it jealousy. What did she actually say? Martha said. She drew our family with an empty space where Sarah should have been. She told her nanny Sarah smelled like lying. She refused to sit beside her at dinner for 6 weeks straight. She told Sarah at dinner, in front of guests, that her eyes didn't match her mouth. He paused. I told Seo Yan it wasn't kind to say that. Seo Yan put her crayon down. She looked at Martha. I told him, she said in her careful English, each word deliberate. I told him many times, Nuna. I know you did, Martha said. Her voice had gone completely soft. I believe you. She has always seen clearly, Park said. He was watching his daughter. I have known it since she was 3 years old, and I kept deciding she was too young to understand what she was looking at. She was never too young, Martha said. No, something moved in his jaw. She was never too young. I was just too comfortable to listen. Seo Yan went back to her coloring. She did not say anything else. She didn't need to. Now here is the part this story needs you to sit with for a moment. A woman crossed an ocean to protect a man she had never met. She was grabbed the moment she walked in, accused with planted evidence, detained by the person she came to help. And the only one in that entire building who saw the truth from the start was 6 years old. Half of you watching this right now think Martha should have walked out of that house the moment that door was unlocked and never once looked back. The other half already know why she didn't, and it had nothing to do with finances. Drop your opinion in the comments right now. And if you are not subscribed, do it before this story ends, because the next part is where everything either breaks or becomes something entirely different. They had 19 days and they could not waste a single one of them. Sarah could not know she had been found. That was the first and most critical constraint. If she sensed exposure before the financial reversal was legally complete and unassailable, she would accelerate the transfer timeline, and the window would close before Martha could stop it, which meant Park Min-jun had to continue being Choi, Sarah's trusted partner for the duration of the operation, while Martha dismantled everything Sarah had built from inside the East Wing office. "You're asking me to stay," Martha said. They were in the East Wing office. 3 screens. Director Han's security team running interference in the background. The financial architecture spread out between them. "I'm asking you to finish what you came here to do," Park said. "The portfolio still needs protecting. The window is 19 days. He held her gaze without softening it. "I also owe you an apology that I have not yet properly given. You detained me, yes, in your guest room. Because your girlfriend planted evidence in my bag, and you chose the physical evidence over what I was telling you directly to your face, yes. While your 6-year-old daughter sat outside that door and passed me drawings, because she had already decided I was telling the truth. Yes, the word cost him something visible. All of that is accurate. I handled it wrongly. You came here to protect what is mine, and I turned it into the opposite of protection, and I am sorry." He did not break eye contact. "I am asking you to stay anyway. I understand completely if you won't." Martha turned to the screens. "The transfer structure uses the quarterly reconciliation cycle to mask the primary routing," she said. "It's sophisticated. We have to unwind it in the same sequence it was built, or we create a counter trail that can be challenged. Hand me the access credentials." Park sat down beside her. "Tell me what you need." They worked for 48 hours straight. On the surface of the house, Sarah moved through her days, performing the version of herself that 10 months had perfected. She was gracious at breakfast. She was warm in the evenings. She tested Park twice with the careful precision of a woman who needed to confirm her security without revealing that she was checking it. The first test came on the morning of the second day. She found him in the sitting room, sat beside him, touched his arm, and told him she had been feeling something distant between them lately, and needed to know she still had his trust. Park covered her hand with his and said exactly the things a man who trusted her completely would say, and felt nothing behind any of it except the cold, specific clarity of someone who now understood exactly what he had been looking at. The second test came over breakfast. She mentioned casually that the accountant appeared still to be on the property, and asked whether that situation had been fully resolved. Park said yes, a misunderstanding being handled, the tone of a man mildly inconvenienced by administrative details. Sarah relaxed. She was genuinely skilled at reading people. She was not quite skilled enough to read him. In the East Wing, Martha worked. She moved through the shell structure the way you move through something built to trap you. Carefully and without rushing, following the construction sequence in reverse, dismantling each layer cleanly so that every counter move had a legitimate business timestamp and rationale that would survive any legal scrutiny anyone could bring to it. It was the most demanding work she had done in 8 years of demanding work, and she moved through it with the focused intensity of someone who had been underestimated her whole life and had long since stopped needing anyone to understand what she was capable of. Seo Yan was everywhere. She brought Martha tea on the first afternoon, with her tongue between her teeth and her entire body concentrated on not spilling it, walking in complete, deliberate silence from the kitchen, all the way to the East Wing office door. She fell asleep on the small sofa at 10 on the second night, one arm hanging off the edge, crayon still loosely in her fingers. Park carried her upstairs and came back and sat down beside Martha, without discussing it, and picked up where they had left off. At 2 in the morning, Martha leaned back and pressed both hands over her eyes. "You haven't slept," Park said. "Neither have you. I need less than most people." "So do I." He looked at her, jacket off, sleeves rolled, second ink stain on her left hand from hours of annotating. Her notepad-eyed pages spread across every available surface in a system only she fully understood. She looked like someone completely at home inside complexity and difficulty. It was striking to watch. She filled in the outline, Martha said. She was looking at the screens. The third drawing she slid under the door. The figure she had left blank. She filled it in completely. Park was quiet. "She had been saving that space for 10 months, Martha said. She knew exactly whose it was before she ever saw my face. She told me when she would recognize the right person immediately when they arrived, Park said. I assumed she was talking about getting a dog. Martha turned and looked at him. She was not talking about getting a dog. No, Park said. She was very much not. Something shifted in the space between them. Neither of them moved toward it directly. Both of them felt it clearly. Martha turned back to the screen and Park stayed exactly where he was, beside her, in the 2 in the morning quiet, with the distance between them smaller than it had been an hour ago, and neither of them doing anything to increase it. The apology comes in installments, Martha said. I want you to know that. I'm aware, Park said. I intend to cover all of them. There are more than you think. There are exactly as many as there are, he said. I'll account for everyone. Martha kept her eyes on the screen. The corner of her mouth moved. On the morning of the 3rd day, she completed the final reversal. She called Director Han in and walked him through the entire chain from beginning to end, every layer, every counter move, every timestamp. The documentation was complete, clean, and legally unassailable from any direction. Yoon Tae-sik's 18-month construction had been dismantled in 48 hours, and there was not one handhold remaining that could be used to challenge it. Director Han looked at the completed work for a long moment. Exceptional, he said. It was not a word he used. Park walked into the main sitting room at 11 that morning and sat across from Sarah and placed 3 things on the table between them. The secondary camera footage. Martha's complete financial reconstruction. A printed record of every communication between Sarah and Yoon Tae-sik's organization across 10 months, timestamps and content both. Sarah looked at the table. She looked at Park. Her composure held for 4 seconds. He counted them. Then it broke. What came out was more complicated than a clean villain's confession. And that was the part that stayed with him longest. Yoon Tae-sik had found Sarah 2 years ago when she was carrying a debt from her family trust that she had no clean way out of. He had managed the situation for her in a way that left her permanently in his reach. She had not come to Park out of nothing. Somewhere in 10 months, she had not entirely not felt what she performed feeling. She said this clearly, and she meant it, and she knew it changed nothing about what she had done. She said that too. Park listened to all of it without expression. When she finished, he said, I know, it doesn't change what it is. Sarah was taken from the house within the hour. She cooperated fully with everything that followed. Yoon Tae-sik's operation was dismantled across the following 3 weeks, through the combination of Park's network and the legally airtight case Martha's documentation made possible. Every layer of the structure Yoon had spent 18 months building came apart methodically and completely, and he had nothing left to stand on when it was gone. The estate exhaled. That was exactly the right word for it. A tension that had been living in the walls of that house for 10 months simply was not there anymore, and the air in every room moved differently. Staff who had been careful and quiet spoke at full volume again. Seo Yeon ran in the corridors without being stopped by anyone. 6 weeks passed. Martha was still there. The restructuring was a genuine reason and she used it. The portfolio needed careful rebuilding in the aftermath of everything that had been done to it, and she was the only person alive who understood the full architecture of what had happened and what was required to correct it properly. This was completely true. It was also not the whole truth, and she was aware of that and chose not to examine it too directly because examining it directly would require deciding something she was not ready to decide. Park Min-jun had not said anything. He was not a man who moved toward what he wanted with words and declarations. He noticed her presence in his house, the way you notice when the light in a room you have lived in for years changes in quality, and you find you have become unwilling to go back to what it was before. Seo Yeon had the patience of absolutely nobody. She found Martha in the garden on a Tuesday morning, barefoot, against every standing rule in the household, carrying her crayon box in both arms, with the careful deliberateness of someone transporting something important. She sat down beside Martha on the garden bench with the settled confidence of someone who had always been heading exactly here, opened the crayon box, and considered its contents with great seriousness. Then she took a drawing from inside the box, folded carefully, the edges aligned, clearly something that had been put away and taken out multiple times, and held it out to Martha. Martha opened it. 3 figures. Park Min-jun, rendered in careful black crayon lines with a slightly stern expression that was a genuinely sexcellent likeness. Seo Yeon, pigtails perfectly captured, yellowed dress, the grass stain faithfully recorded on the left knee. And Martha, caramel tones layered with the same careful attention as the drawing slid under the door, curly hair, and a smile that Seo Yeon had drawn with the specific confidence of someone who had seen it and intended to preserve it. All 3 figures with their hands connected. Every space filled in, nothing left as outline, nothing saved for later. At the top in Seo Yeon's block letters, our family. Martha's throat closed entirely. I saved the space, Seo Yeon said. She was looking up at Martha with her father's stillness and her mother's eyes. I knew you were coming, Nuna. I just had to wait for Appa to stop being wrong. Martha looked up. Park Min-jun was standing at the garden entrance. He had followed his daughter. He had known exactly what she was about to do. And he had let her do it because she had been right about everything from the beginning, and he had learned at genuine cost to himself to trust her judgment over his own without reservation. He walked to the bench and sat down beside Martha. He looked at the drawing she was holding. He was quiet for a moment in his way, and then he said, She has been carrying that drawing for 3 weeks. She finished it the day after you chose to stay. I know, Martha said. She told me. She also informed me, Park said, that if I did not stop being afraid of making another wrong choice, she would handle the situation herself. Those were her precise words. Handle it herself. Where do you think she learned that? Martha said. From herself, Park said. She has been handling things herself since she was 6 years old in a corridor with her arms crossed and her whole body shaking. He turned and looked at Martha directly. The armor that lived on him in every other context of his life was not present right now in this garden on this Tuesday morning. He looked like a man who had made serious errors and understood them completely, and was sitting beside someone he had no intention of losing. I would like to stop owing you installments, he said quietly. If you are willing to let me try something different. Martha looked at the drawing in her hands. She looked at Seo Yeon, who had resumed coloring with the focused innocence of someone who was listening to absolutely every word. She looked at Park Min-jun, who was looking back at her with the same quality of attention his daughter had. Clear, and still and completely willing to be seen. You sat on the floor, Martha said. I did. Twice. At minimum twice, yes. Men who run what you run don't sit on floors. This one does, Park said. When it matters. Apparently it matters more than I expected. Seo Yeon put her crayon down. She had reached the absolute outer boundary of her patience, and she looked at her father with the exasperated authority of someone who had engineered this entire situation across 6 weeks and several carefully placed drawings, and could not believe how long 2 adults were taking to catch up with a conclusion she had reached months ago. Appa, she said. Just hold her hand. The garden was quiet around them. Light through the trees. A small girl with uneven pigtails, watching 2 adults with the expression of someone who wrote the last page of this story a long time ago and has simply been waiting for the rest of it to arrive. Park Min-jun reached over and took Martha's hand. Martha looked down at their hands. She looked up at him. She did not pull away. Seo Yeon picked up her crayon and went back to coloring with the deep and total satisfaction of someone who has been right about something important for a very long time and has finally been proven correct in front of witnesses. Here is what this story was really saying from the very first moment. Courage is not the absence of fear. Seo Yeon's voice broke on that first word in the corridor. Her hands were shaking. She could see exactly how large those men were. And she stood in front of them anyway, and she did not move, because the love was larger than the fear, and that made her the bravest person in that building, by a distance that no one else came close to. The most powerful man in that house had every advantage that exists. Resources, reputation, network, 15 years of building something unassailable. And he still needed a 6-year-old girl in bare feet on a marble floor, to show him where to look and what was worth protecting and how to stop being wrong. Martha crossed an ocean to protect him and got grabbed and accused and locked in a room for it. She stayed anyway, not because she owed him anything, because a child slid drawings under a door and called her Nuna and had been saving a space in every picture she drew for the person she already knew was coming. That is what it looks like when someone chooses you before you have given them a single reason to. If this story moved you, share it right now with someone who needs to hear it. Like this video, leave a comment below. Subscribe to this channel because we tell stories like this one, and we are not finished. And if there is someone in your life who has been trying to tell you something true, that you keep deciding they are too small, or too young, or too something to know, this is your sign. Listen to them. They have been right the whole time.